mention a couple things. Robert Bell wrote in Habits of the Heart, there's three approaches to work. Work could be a job, something you do to make a living and earn some money, and so you're going to work back and forth every day. Or work can be a career. Your idea is I'll do this for a while, and then hopefully I'll get a promotion, and then I'll move over here, and then your focus is on the career. And that's the reason you go to school, and that's the reason you do this. Or work is a calling. And I think that that's really what is an important way to think about public education. I felt like when I was here, that was my calling, and I felt that way. I feel that way even now that I'm supposedly retired. That's been my calling, and I still am just as passionate about public education. And I would say, as the Apostle Paul did in Colossians, don't just do the minimum that will get you by. Do your best. Work from the heart for your real master, for God, confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. Keep in mind that the ultimate master you're serving is Christ. And then I like how he ends it. Being Christian doesn't cover up bad work. So that's my little inspirational. And far and away, I'll get this down here in a minute. Theodore Roosevelt once said, far and away the best prize that life has to offer is the chance to work hard at work worth doing. And education is work worth doing. Now, research points to three overarching components of successful schools. Strong curriculum instruction in the classroom, teacher preparation, support, collaboration, feedback on practice, and significant family engagement practices. How are we doing in these three big areas? Well, California's been a leader through our own standards, our own curriculum frameworks, now with the Common Core, in trying to articulate a broad liberal arts education. Have we always implemented it? No. In fact, in some areas, we don't have much visual performing arts being offered. We've cut back on different programs. That's one of the reasons why we want to talk about Common Core. Teacher preparation, unfortunately, varies. Biola has a very fine school of education. If you come through here, you'll be well prepared for the next step in your education experience. But unfortunately, schools of eds vary. And I feel like we've done a very poor job in general, of supporting teachers in the classroom, and we have not been able to figure out how to give enough, in most schools, how to give enough time for teacher collaboration and working together. That's really the key of improving our instruction. And family engagement, parent engagement, I'm sad to say some people forget it's public education. Public is the word that's in front. And we need to do a lot more on that. If the public's not with us, we won't be making progress in the school, and the students won't learn as much. Well, the Common Core were actually approved in 2010. We went through quite a little process here in California. We actually set up a little special commission to examine the Common Core as they were being developed. The Common Core had to be signed off by the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Governor, and by the State Board of Education. And I say most importantly by the State Board of Education because they're the ones that come along later and then set the assessments, set the cut scores, will approve the curriculum such that the state reviews it. The curriculum is established at the local level, and so forth. So I've got to remember to do this, sorry. In my opinion, and this is why I'm enthusiastic about the Common Core, this gives us a new means and a new motivation to address the weaknesses and inequalities in American public education. Now, Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954, said, unequal delivery of education is not constitutional. And I started in migrant education when I started my career. Actually, I sort of started my career here at Biola because we had the Watts riots, and we started going down on Saturdays into the Watts area doing programs for children. And that's one of the places where I crossed paths with a nice young woman who later on became my wife. And she was totally focused on being a teacher. I wasn't 100% sure. I knew I wanted to work with young people somewhere, but my career actually started in migrant education. So I feel this equity agenda is still very important to us. If you've had a chance to visit various schools around California, you'll see that there's a big variation in the way schools deliver education. And we don't want one size fits all, but we do want more equality than we have now. And the gap between the wealthy and the poor is really astounding. My wife and I tutor 2 days a week at a high poverty school near where we live. And so we match up the fifth graders with the kindergartners. We do a peer tutoring program, but it constantly kind of shocks me, really. I mean, I've been doing this my whole life, but the poverty that some of these kids come from. We have kids eating out of the garbage cans, even though we give them a free breakfast. I mean, it is a little bit appalling. So in my opinion, the Common Core gives us another chance to relook at that. What we don't want is to have this just be another passing reform, another thing added on. So the Common Core should refocus us on what's really important for being citizens in our society. To emphasize critical and analytical thinking, comprehension and use of complex tests, problem solving, purposeful written and oral communication. The standards include the Common Core standards for California. We added on a few additional math standards in order to be closer aligned to our existing math standards. The English language arts standards are very similar. One of the reasons they're very similar is most of the country thought that our English language arts standards were very good, and our framework is used as a model around the country. And also, it turns out that the authors of the language arts were the same people we hired some years back to develop our English language arts standards. So you'll see a big correlation there. And what we want is, we don't want just someone to have a good experience in one class or two classes or in this school or that school. We want kids to be prepared to be successful. These are not words to me. Whether they go to career, whether they go on to school, these are because in other countries, we have done a very good job. If you look at the NAEP scores, for example, our NAEP scores continue to go up. Now the paper will say, well, California's, down in the list of states. Well, we test everybody. I don't want to get caught up in this whole NAEP thing, but we test everybody. Some states, now it turns out, don't. They're admitting it. But we do very good in general on student achievement. But underneath that, there's great variation. Unfortunately, some kids we're doing a very poor job with, other kids we're doing a great job, and that's what we have to work on. Common Core, far from a one-size-fits-all, the Common Core was designed to establish broad performance standards that could easily be adapted to quite different curricula and pedagogical approaches. There's no embedded, secret, shadowy pedagogical approach to the Common Core. I think the biggest challenge is the development of coherent and rigorous curricula. To me, I'm a curriculum instruction person. Everything starts from what we want kids to know and be able to do, and we build the curriculum out. Then you have to do a scope and sequence so that you have some organized sequence across the grades. We also want to understand the spiraling. Our old math standards actually started algebra in kindergarten. Now, if you hadn't really studied our standards, you wouldn't know that. The same type of spiraling effect is even more prominent in the Common Core. So there's a number of resources. By the way, Biola has done such a good job. This is I think it's a fine resource. This is actually electronic. You give you a print copy, and every link, there's about 100 links in here live, so you can just tap on those links. It takes you right to the resources. And as June said, there'll be additional resources sent to you, modules and other things. But the spiraling, there's several resources in this booklet that talk about the spiraling. You can see, you can follow from whatever grade you're in. You can see what's below you and what's ahead of you and where you should potentially follow. It's actually a local decision ultimately. So we still want to allow for teacher flexibility and creativity. And as I said, this is particularly important, I think, for kids in poverty. Now, what's the threat to Common Core? Well, I think the threat is implementation and rollout. It's always, if you don't implement things, fully implement in a authentic way, then they fall short. And the emphasis on my little talk right now is on a comprehensive way. There are a number of components. So what we don't want to do is move directly from standards to assessments. We're sort of thinking that way. You know, I hear a lot of that in the press. And the educators I hang around with, they're all already starting to think about what's on the assessments. So this little chart reminds us, I'm sorry it's not up here, but it reminds us that once you have studied the Common Core standards, then you need to think about what is the scope and sequence and work with your other teachers. At what point are you going to introduce what topic? What's the alignment of the courses you're going to offer in your school? How do they line up? If you're in elementary, how do they line up with junior high? Then you have to think about what instruction materials that we'll talk about in just a minute. So you can't just go from straight from standards to assessment. Otherwise, assessment drives the curriculum. And we've seen that in the past, and we don't want to. My particular worries are that we espouse a broad liberal arts education in California. That's why we have 8 curriculum frameworks that explain very deeply all these subjects. But still, right now, we're only going to test math and language arts. So I'm particularly concerned about visual performing arts. That needs to come back. Civics, we need to embed civics across every grade. We've only done a fair job on that. And we don't want to be leaving out history and social studies. The math curriculum framework, the new math curriculum framework, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about curriculum frameworks. One, because I spent a lot of time with the Curriculum Commission. But two, I think the frameworks are the best way that you can look at the standards in the context of the instruction that could be delivered at your grade. So these frameworks are all online. The math framework was just approved in November of 2013. They have specific chapters, including how to convey that kind of content to special ed students. A lot on English learners. A number of pedagogical suggestions. The curriculum frameworks, I think, are particularly valuable. So they're designed to be a step-by-step guide. Then we have this guide. This guide was reviewed by the state board very recently. So Biola's done you a favor, I think, in giving you a hard copy. And it's designed to be a step-by-step guide, practical guide, whether you're a principal, a parent, or superintendent, or local school board. Because this guide emphasizes a number of things that I think are really important when we think about the Common Core. First of all, the teaching role is front and center. We kind of say that sometimes, but we haven't always done that. These decisions have been made here. Teachers get the direction at the last minute down here. We haven't always emphasized professional capital. That is, the way we work together as a team becomes very important in that collaborative decision making. The expansive liberal arts education. The Common Core maintain the fundamental skills while at the same time moving to deepen learning. And we have an opportunity now to improve access for students with disabilities. In the same context, we have decisions now being pushed to the local level, to the district level, and in many cases onto the school level. What kind of decisions? How to teach, how to get instructional resources into the hands of teachers, how to get people trained, how to integrate technology with high quality teaching, how to organize the district to effectively use the Common Core. These are big decisions, and all these should start in a public discussion at the local school board level. So when you get to the step one, I would just say this. When decisions devolve to individual schools and classrooms, leaders will need to consider how parents can be assured that regardless of zip code, their children will receive the same high quality instruction. That's our mission, and one of the reasons the state has taken over in the last 20 years some decisions is because that inequality was not getting corrected. So I'm for local control, move those decisions down to the local level, but that comes with a big responsibility. That means we have to really be aware that kids are all getting, in every classroom you're getting a good education. The systems approach, there's a lot of components to this, and I want us to think about this because every component needs to be aligned. This is the simplest way to think about it, and this is the way the leadership guide is organized around these 10 components. Why 10 components? Again, every part of the district and school needs to be aligned. So it doesn't matter if you're in after school, if you're in special ed, if you're a school psychologist, if you're not on the same page, then this could be just another reform and it won't be sustained. So let's start with capacity building. The first, I have a slight bias, by the way. The circle that I just showed, there's no numbering here. And I did that on purpose because you can actually start anywhere. You can group them however you want at the district or school level. But I do have my own bias. That is, you should, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, there is a little bit of an order. That is, you start with how you develop the capacity for implementing. That means some people have to be deeply trained. You have to have some type of leadership team formed that should be heavily represented by teachers. And you should be able to demonstrate, not just talk, collaborative teaming right from the beginning. I would suggest contracting with a third party, whether it's the county office, a nonprofit, a profit company, because analyzing the resources that you have at the school and district level, both the instructional resources, the technology resources, and the fiscal resources, is not easy to do on a fairly fast track. And we're not used to keeping books that way and keeping track of things, especially at the school level. So that's a big question. And the first question to ask, has your district completed the technology readiness tool? And has there been a review taken of the adequacy of instructional resources? Next week, the state board will adopt. Now, we don't have state adoption per se anymore. All these decisions are made by local districts. But the state board, they're still using the word adoption, but will really approve 31 math programs that are aligned to the Common Core. Well, you might be a teacher or a school that you're trying to develop a lot of your units yourself. Or you might want to use some of the supplementals and add on to your existing curriculum. Or you may want to look at a totally new curriculum, like it's coming out here for math. But whatever you do, it has to be deeply aligned to the Common Core. This is not an easy task. I'll talk about that in a minute under curriculum instruction. Secondly, communication. The latest survey done by USC shows a majority of parents do not know what the Common Core is about. Now we're coming up on a field test that Carrick's going to talk about here in a little bit of the Smarter Balanced Assessments. How many teachers know what the items might look like, let alone the parents? I lived through the California Learning Assessment System debacle, I guess you would say, or anyway, it was a good assessment effort and it collapsed. The main reason it collapsed was because parents didn't understand what the test was about. They couldn't understand, what is this test really testing? And I'm sorry to say, we have not done a great job in engaging our parents on that. And the media is only going to talk about Common Core when there's a controversy. So, right? So take advantage and work with your district or with your county office. Most county offices have pretty good size public relations. If you're in LA Unified, you've got a whole public relations department. And meet with that media now. If you're a principal, ask who would come from the district so you can meet with the media before something else happens. Then curriculum instruction. Again, I'm biased. I think this is where you start. And a curriculum is not a piece of paper that guides the teacher. It's a living document that guides and brings coherence to the whole education endeavor. Standards are statements of goals. Curriculum is the roadmap that's used to help students acquire and master those skills. I heard on some radio program, they said, well, the Common Core is a curriculum that's being forced. The Common Core is not a curriculum. The Achilles heel of, I think, of our current instructional system is we don't have a clearly coherent K-12 instruction. You have, these primary grade teachers will do this, and then they'll go to the middle elementary and they'll be doing something a little bit different. Or even, it could be even different teacher to teacher. And then you go, we're not exactly lined up when they go to high school because high school expects this, this, and this. And even worse, if they go on to college, some colleges expect things differently than what we've just taught in the K-12 system. We need to have a clear, coherent curriculum with a clear scope and sequence. I wouldn't want to teach in a school if there wasn't a clear scope and sequence, because I would want to know what the teachers are teaching before my grade and what they'll be expecting after my grade. E.D. Hirsch said, the single most effective way to enhance teacher effectiveness is to create a coherent multi-year curriculum so that teachers at each level will know what students have already been taught. So when you develop your modules or you expand the curriculum that's available to you, you'll be able to zero right in on that. Now these resources are listed in your booklet. And again, these are the two curriculum frameworks that are out. The language arts framework is so interesting because it embeds the English language development standards in with the language arts expectations. So it's really a rich contextual instruction document, and well worth your read. The draft is up online, as I noted there, and it's in your book. The next step is to make sure that your instructional resources and electronic resources are aligned. In the back of each curriculum framework is a rubric, a suggested rubric for analyzing both the instructional materials and the electronic resources. I think that's invaluable. It's very challenging. Let's just say you were just picking out the 31 math programs that are going to be, up on the web next week. Well, where would you start? That's a pretty big task, right? So using rubric that are suggested is a big help. We also have resources like CLearn, the California Learning Resource Network. They have reviewed literally hundreds of programs from around the country, many of them technology-based, and to what degree they align with the Common Core, including whole electronic courses. So that might be of some interest to you. I think they've done a great job. That resource is not utilized as deeply as it could be. Fifth is professional development for all, and I stress all because everyone that comes in contact with students, everyone that's involved in the instructional process needs to understand the Common Core. Too often we have a workshop for the teachers. We forget about the instructional aides. We haven't got the other folks on campus involved. The study that was done at USC shows that where does the average person learn about what goes on in schools? Well, surprisingly, I don't know if it's surprising, not from the newspaper, it's not from TV. It's from the teacher or someone that works at the school. Even the bus driver. If their bus driver happens to live next door, they'll ask them, what's going on in our school? So it's very important that they all receive some training. And of course, the principals have a big responsibility. They have to be well-grounded in how to observe instruction, how to support professional learning communities, both in person and online, with time and money, and modeling that new teamwork. We haven't all done that during the course of our career, so that's very important. The sixth one is student learning feedback systems, new assessment, reflection, and instructional adjustments. And the reason I put this sixth is because assessment follows instruction. You can't make assessment decisions, and assessment, all the assessments should be at the service of teaching. So we've had some experience here in California of having instructional programs with embedded assessments in the programs. So every Friday or every other Friday, you get some feedback. To me, it's very important that you get that constant feedback. Now, that's not state assessment. State assessment is done for a totally different purpose. That's for accountability purposes. But you'll want to have a lot of formative type assessments, and we have that opportunity now with the Common Core to do that. It's particularly important, I think, now when we look at our intervention programs, because we'll want to be clearer on what students will need to go into what program and what's the criteria for when they exit. You'll see now or you've heard that the new special ed task force that Mike Kirsch, the president of the state board, just formed. They just had their first meeting last week, and their task is to look at such things as entering, placement, and exit criteria for special ed in light of the Common Core. A really big topic and an important topic. The use of the placement exit criteria needs to be reviewed, intervening. I would just point out that the National Center on Response to Intervention has a number of well-researched progress monitoring tools right down to the individual student. So I put that web source there. It's in your resource guide as well. If you look at this diagram came out, if you look at the Common Core, on the left, and you're looking at scope and sequence, which is where the place to start, and developing that curriculum. Excuse me. Then you develop lesson plans, and then you see how literacy and the math can be taught through all the subjects. Then you move towards the interim and formative assessments, which in my mind should be at 2 to 6 week intervals, so that teachers are getting a lot of information back so you can adjust instruction. Then you finally get to the summative assessments, which is the smarter balanced assessment. It goes without saying that we need to take a new look now at all the instructional programs that are aligned around that, particularly preschool. We have in California developed the learning foundations, the early learning foundations. If you're not familiar with that, it's worth looking at if you interact with preschoolers or if you're a kindergarten teacher. It's an excellent, excellent document, but a lot of us don't know about it and we haven't really studied it. I mentioned the after school program. The role for academic coaches probably needs to be rethought in light of the Common Core. Now technology, which a lot of us were more focused on the technology, what's the latest thing? Notice I put it down here 8th, because once you decide what the curriculum instruction is, how you're going to assess, then you pick the tools. And there's 3 parts to assess, to think about technology anyway. There's data, there's assessment, and there's instruction. And so you have to think of them in 3 different ways. Student capabilities in light of the technology expectations for Common Core are quite significant. I mean, you hear about keyboarding, because my kids, they're all going like this. Well, that's not the way you're going to have to take a test on the computer, and a lot of kids don't know keyboarding. And teachers, if you're in a classroom where all the computers come in on a cowl or whatever you call that, and every school calls it something different, I've heard, and then you get your hour, 2 hours of use, and then it goes on. You have to have some experience yourself with what the new technologies are that you're going to use. And you shouldn't, in my opinion, just jump out and buy the latest iPad or the latest whatever, and it's preloaded with whatever, until you've made the decisions as to what you want to teach. So that's why it's important to think of the Technology Readiness Survey. There's actually 7 steps, I think, that are important. One is the bandwidth of the schools and the classrooms. We've done a good job in this state through the high-speed network that covers the state, connecting the county offices, connecting the district offices. Not quite so good with every school, and not quite so good with every classroom. So every classroom should be at a point now where you're installing wireless, because that's the future. Well, if you don't have the bandwidth right from the get-go, as soon as the assessments are going to come up, you're not going to be able to do any of your data. It's going to take up the whole bandwidth. So how do you take attendance? How do you do any of your data? How do you do anything else? And if any of the other teachers are doing instruction using that, they just got knocked off the network. We have to assess the district ability to maintain and support this technology. It's going to take more money and more manpower. And the expertise to manage this kind of bigger, more sophisticated network needs to be given some careful thought. The data management system will need to be looked at and updated. And then working with teachers. I always say teachers first. Teachers ought to have the primary say on what devices and other hardware and software that will be used to escalate instruction and student engagement. 6, technology skills of students, I've mentioned. And 7th, the systematic outreach to parents. Many parents will want to reinforce the technology-based instruction that the kids are getting at school, but they have to know about it, and they have to know how they connect with it. And unfortunately, there's not that many schools that have those connections available to the parents. So that's something to think about at your school. What's the best way to do that? Some parents, some families won't have that, but the ones that do will want it, and you want to encourage that. And obviously, you align your fiscal resources. We're kind of jumping the gun here because this, we have so much flexibility now given to the districts with the money, and we have an extra $1.25 billion that's given to implement the Common Core. So we're like scrambling with this new money. I mean, unfortunately, I lived through the era. I was Secretary of Ed when we had to announce the latest cut, more cuts, cut. So I was so popular at that time. But that was the era we lived in. Okay, thankfully we're out of that era, but we're out of it just as a lot of new opportunities now are on the horizon. So you don't want to just run out and spend that money. You want to think more strategically. And I'll just say the implications for human resources are tremendous. If I was a principal and I was given some authority to hire teachers, I'd want to make sure that they are trained on the Common Core in their schools of ed. And that means, in some cases, talking to the school of ed, because everybody's in a different place. So you don't want to start from ground zero, and you want to think about what's the best way to support them and to have that collaborative practice on once they get to your school campus. And finally, transitions to higher education and careers. We've done very little work on what it really takes to have the student prepared to go directly into the workplace. And you'll see in the next couple of years work, and you can start this at your school and district level, but you'll see a lot more work on, well, what exactly are the requirements for auto shop, for the new, that embed the Common Core so that when they come out of your program, they'll be ready to be hired right there by whatever company is ready to hire them. We don't have that clear a criteria. We say 21st century skills, and we say but they're awfully vague. They're not down to the specific level. Also, we've done very little work in getting feedback from employers in your area. Every area has a couple of primary employers. That's one of the things that's driven California to do some of this deeper work in Common Core around Sacramento. We have Intel, we have a number of big technology companies, and they would hire high school graduates if they were better prepared, in their opinion. So we need to be paying attention to that. And lastly, I gave you some resources here, but there's a lot of resources in your book. So again, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I really thank you for taking the time to do this. This is just a thumbnail sketch, but it's so important to spend some time in thinking about what the Common Core means to me in my classroom, in my program. Thank you very much.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.